Hi, I'm Pedro da Costa, editorial fellow here at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'm joined by Monica de Bolle, senior fellow here, and we're talking about the Rio Olympics, which normally would be cause for celebration, but this year could be a bit of a cause for concern given the political and economic backdrop in Brazil and even the fiscal situation in the state of Rio. Could you give us a little bit of the background of what's happening in Brazil? I mean, in the recent, in the last few weeks? Since we last spoke here,
in Brazil, things are happening on a second-by-second basis. So, it's been very much a
roller coaster.
On the Olympics itself, and then I'll speak a little bit more about the overall situation in the country. But on the Olympics specifically, it is telling that in the midst of a political and economic crisis, as we're seeing in Brazil, the Olympics is like the least talked about subject in Brazil. So you open the newspapers, you read the press, and the news is all about the politics, the economics, mostly the politics. And there's very little on the Olympics.
Sure, because the corruption scandal is much more exciting, right?
Yeah, and on the ground, at this moment, I mean, of course, Brazilians tend to only focus on things kind of last minute. Being a Brazilian, I can say that. You, being as a Brazilian, know that as well. But it is surprising that, 2 months away from the opening ceremony, there is surprisingly little interest on the ground. For this mega sports event. So, it really is revealing of where worries and preoccupations actually lie.
And what about ticket sales and that kind of stuff? Are you getting any figures on that?
Well, what we've seen from ticket sales, it's very hard to find data because the official sites don't really tell you very much about, ticket sales, about, other things like the infrastructure projects that are happening, what they're costing, how they're moving along. It's very hard to find that kind of data. But what we do know is that if you try to buy, for example, a ticket for the soccer final, and the soccer final should be a big thing, you can actually find tickets for the soccer final still, So that tells you that tickets are likely undersold. And in fact, the few press reports on this that we have seen are pointing in that direction. So there's a concern, there's a concern that it will be, the party will be nice. The 2 weeks, that the Olympics are, during which the Olympics are happening, will probably be, all eyes focused in Rio and everything going, I think, relatively smoothly as the World Cup.
It's not a question of the infrastructure not working or the water being dirty. All that stuff tends to be sorted out by the time the event comes around, right?
It won't, but people will focus on other things and they will look at the Olympics the way they always look at the Olympics. Yeah, it's a major event, and all eyes will be on the sports and on the athletes and everything else. But the real worry is, what's the legacy of all of this and what comes after? I mean, what does it imply for the country specifically? What does it imply for the state? And what does it imply for the city? I mean, of the three, the city of Rio right now is financially sound. Compared to the other two. The state is not financially sound. The state has actually recently defaulted on 2 international loans and had to be saved by the National Treasury, which was the guarantor for those loans. And the country, as we know, is, floundering.
Yeah. And so, the economy itself could probably be described as Brazil's Great Depression right now. It's one of the, if not the deepest recessions in modern history. So that's pretty unusual for a country to be hosting as large an event as the Olympics in the middle of such chaos. And if you add the political chaos on top of it, can you think of any modern precedent for that?
No, it's a first. Actually, if you look at data going back to 1964, it's the first time that a country hosts the Olympic Games and is having a recession at the same time. This is since 1964. If we go, back further than that, I don't know. But since 1964, that is definitely true. And certainly we haven't had this kind of toxic combination. I mean, even Brazil hasn't had it. And as you said, it is definitely Brazil's Great Depression. And in fact, Brazil's finance minister just said that this morning in a speech. He said, he said this 2-year recession that, encompassing 2015 and 2016 will most likely be Brazil's Great Depression. It is already looking far worse than what happened to Brazil during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a first in that respect, and that's very unfortunate because it is the first. These are the first Olympic Games to be held in South America.
Yeah. So let's talk about the broader outlook for Brazil. I mean, in the near term, is there any chance that the Olympics could actually boost growth? And then in the longer run, do you think that the new president has made any progress on reforms? I know there's been a little bit of his scandal. You know, his government has had scandals of its own with certain ministers stepping down and so on. So what are the challenges ahead for the new president, and what's the likely impact of the Olympics on the economy?
So on the likely impact, what the academic literature shows is that really, if you decide to host the Olympics, it's not about the economic impact. It's about all sorts of other things, but not, soft power, what have you.
Foreign clout.
What have you, but not about the economic impact, which is usually, it's either a zero-sum game or there's some loss for the country in question.
And there's plenty of slideshows of old abandoned Olympic fields that I've seen.
Exactly, so. And the literature is really very conclusive on that point. So, I really don't think that the benefit is really going to come from that.
Yeah.
On the government and the things that have been happening recently, this government is going to be completing 30 days very soon, actually, this week, this coming Friday, actually next Friday. So what's been done in these 30 days. So within these 30 days, actually a lot was done. We have an entirely new economic team. The government has changed a number of key positions have been completely changed. There's been 180.
Even the central bank, right?
Even the central bank, the finance ministry, the head of Brazil's development bank, BNDES, the head of Petrobras, you name it, there's someone new in charge. And these are generally people who have very good reputations. These are very well established people, and news of this has been very well received in Brazil. So on the economics, things are looking actually better in some sense. The big problem, of course, is still the politics, and there have been, as we saw in recent weeks, ministers that were involved or allegedly involved in activities to obstruct the corruption probe in Brazil, and these ministers have since left the government. The two ministers that have left the government are actually people who are relatively close advisors to interim President Michel Temer. So of course this has been a blow for him. And we're at this stage where the impeachment trial is ongoing. There's no yet great clarity as to how this process is going to move along. The expectation is that it will be finished by mid-August, so smack in the middle of the Olympics, and that's a little bit strange. It will also be a first.
Yeah.
Not knowing exactly who is the country's leader.
Absolutely.
During this major event.
Absolutely. Who holds the torch? Yeah.
Who makes the opening speech? All of these things. So there's a lot to be concerned about still in Brazil. But there are a few things to be hopeful for. I mean, the fact that there is a clear agenda on the economic front, the fact that there seems to be a shift in the making on foreign policy and trade issues in Brazil. Brazil has been completely closed off from the international, from the global markets and everything else for a very long time. And there's now a clear shift in foreign policy. There's a clear shift towards, more greater concerns over trade and openness and all of these things. Of course, not in line exactly with what's happening in the rest of the world, but still, that's a positive for Brazil, and it shows that the country is trying to move in a new direction. Hopefully, the politics won't get in the way too much, but they will get in the way to some extent, as they have been recently.
At the very least, Brazilians will get a reprieve from the political mayhem as the games arrive, and they're certain to throw a good party? I guess it all depends on how bad the hangover ends up being.
Well,
right?
that's exactly the question. I mean, we will get 2 weeks of relief, and then we have to wait and see how bad the hangover is.
Monica, thank you so much.
Thank you.